Every morning a man walked down to the sea and looked for a ship. For most of his life one always came, carrying iron, timber, news from a world across the water. And then, one year, no ship came, and none ever would again. We do not know that man's name, but we know something he left behind. There is a short letter. A wedding was held and a man married a woman. A priest signed his name and witnesses signed theirs. The year was 1408. The letter was carried across the North Atlantic to Iceland, where someone copied it into a book. And because they copied it into a book, we still have it today. It is the last letter that ever left Norse Greenland. After that, nothing. No more letters. No more ships came back with news. For 400 years, no one in Europe heard from these people again. When sailors finally returned, centuries later they found roofless churches, empty farms, and the bones of a world that had quietly stopped existing. This is the story of one of the men who lived through those final years. His name was Eric. We do not actually know his name. No one ever wrote it down, but he was there, on a farm, with a wife, with a daughter, watching the ships come less often, and then not at all. This is what it might have been like to be Eric, to live at the end of the world and not know it. Greenland had not always felt like the end of the world. When his great-great-grandfathers crossed from Iceland 4 centuries before, they did not come as legends. They came as farmers, as outcasts, as families looking for land. They settled along the southern fjords, where summer placed narrow strips of green between mountains and water. In good years the grass grew, the animals grazed. A man could look at the valley and convince himself that life might hold. They built turf houses, cattle byres, small stone churches, burial grounds, a world that looked Norse, prayed Christian, and survived by learning Greenland's rules. For generations it worked. Ships came often enough to keep the colony stitched to the world it had come from. News arrived with them. Iron arrived with them. Timber arrived with them. The sense that this place, however remote, was still attached to something larger. By Eric's time, that thread was wearing thin. The western settlement, further north, had already gone silent. The bishop's seat in Gardar was empty. The official routes from Norway were thinner each decade. Europe had changed, and Greenland was no longer as useful to it as it had once been. But here in the eastern settlement, people continued to live. Eric had work to do, animals to feed, a daughter who would soon be old enough to marry. He did not know he was living near the end of a colony. To him, this was just another morning, and that is what makes it frightening. Inside Eric's house, the warmth is real but unpleasant. Smoke hangs under the roof. It sits in wool, in hair, in bedding, in skin. His wife, Gudrid, is checking what remains of the stored food. She counts in silence. She has been counting in silence for weeks now. His father shifts near the fire because his joints hurt before storms. The old man no longer asks about the ship. He has stopped expecting them. Their daughter Astrid is awake but pretending not to be, listening to adults discuss hay in the careful voices people use when they do not want fear to spread. The animals matter more than pride. A sheep that survives winter is wool, milk, meat, and next year's possibility. A cow is wealth, but also trouble. It eats too much. It needs too much. In a good year, cattle make a farm respectable. In a bad year, they become a question everyone avoids until the answer is unavoidable. Eric knows the numbers before he speaks them. How much hay is left? Which animal has weakened? Which tool may not last until spring? No one needs to say the farm is in danger. The evidence is physical. It is in the thin flank of a sheep, in the patched roof, in the blade sharpened beyond its proper life. Places like this do not collapse all at once, they adjust. One fewer animal kept through winter, one more hunt taken in unsafe weather, one repair made badly because better material is not coming. Morning work begins before the light has strength. Ice is broken from troughs, animals are checked, a weak lamb is lifted, warmed, argued over. Gudrid wants to keep it. Eric knows what the numbers say. Neither of them speaks the truth out loud. They will decide later. or they will pretend to decide later, and the lamb will die anyway. He runs his hand along the side of another sheep. Too thin, not dying, not today, but thin enough to make him pause. He says nothing. There is no use frightening people with what they already know. By mid-morning, Eric is thinking less about the sheep and more about the water. For the first settlers, the farm had been the center of survival. Pasture, milk, meat, hay, wool, but Greenland teaches slowly, and then all at once the sea could not be ignored. Over generations, Norse Greenlanders came to rely more heavily on marine food. Seals were not simply emergency food for desperate years. They became part of the rhythm of survival. Eric walks toward the fjord with two other men. The older one watches where the ice has changed color, where water moves beneath what looks solid, where a wrong step might become the last thing a man does. The younger one listens. The young always listen here, because the alternative is to die learning. The sea is not romantic to them. It is cold, dangerous, and practical. A seal can mean meat, fat, skin, oil, warmth. One more week before a hard decision has to be made at home. They wait near the edge of the ice. Waiting is most of the work. Waiting for weather, waiting for movement, waiting for a head to break the surface in the right place for 1 second too long. When the seal appears, nothing becomes heroic. A body lowers, a hand tightens, a breath stops. The strike has to be right because the animal will not offer itself twice. Then the water breaks. For a few seconds everything is motion, shouting, ice, the animals wait, men trying not to lose what they came for, and then it is over. Not cleanly, not beautifully, just over. They drag the seal back with the tired concentration of people who know exactly what it is worth. No one celebrates. Celebration belongs to abundance. This is arithmetic, another small delay in the argument with winter. On the walk home, the youngest man looks toward the open water. Eric follows his gaze. They both know what he is looking for. There is nothing there. A seal can feed a household, but it cannot bring iron from Norway. There is a wedding at Valsey. People arrive slowly in ones and twos carrying the day with them. Salt on sleeves, smoke in hair, mud on boots. Eric pulls Astrid back before she can step on a grave marker. She is too small to remember her grandmother is buried there. The church is not large enough to make anyone feel powerful. That is not what it offers. It offers order. In a place where storms can erase a path overnight, the church gives the year a shape. Fasts, feasts, marriages, burials, names spoken aloud before the ground receives them. Even here, at the edge of the Atlantic, they are not trying to become something else. They are Christian Norse people. They know the prayers. They know how a life should be baptized, witnessed, joined, forgiven, and buried. The bride is Sigrid Bjornsdottir. The groom is Thorstein Olafsson. The priest reads the words. The witnesses watch. Sigrid is somewhere in her 20s. Thorstein is older. The marriage is being made for the right reasons. Land, family, future. No one inside the church hears history closing a door behind them. Somewhere maybe months later, or a year later, the marriage will be written down. Someone will carry the letter across the sea to Iceland. A clerk will copy it into a book. That book will survive. Sigrid's name will survive. It will become the last clear voice from Norse Greenland that the outside world ever hears. But no one in the church that day knows this. They are not making history. They are making a marriage. Eric will speak to neighbors outside, discuss the harvest, discuss the weather, discuss whether Olaf's eldest son should be allowed to court his cousin. The ordinary business of a community that still believes it has a future. Months later, he will return from a trip down the coast carrying a small piece of news tucked into a scrap of vellum, a document, a blessing, a reminder that they are still part of the church, still part of the world. It will be one of the last documents he ever sees. The next winter is hard. The one after that is harder. The priest is older now. There are fewer people standing at the back than there used to be. The prayers are the same, but the silence around them has grown heavier. The old men remember ships better than the young ones do. That is how the change reveals itself, not as one clean break, but as a difference between generations. One old man remembers 4 arrivals in a single summer of his youth. Another remembers 2. A child has only ever heard the stories and suspects the adults exaggerate. But sometimes, still, a sail appears. When it does, the settlement changes posture. People watch without admitting they are watching. They notice what comes off first: iron, timber, cloth, grain, if fortune is kind. News from Iceland, news from a church that still claims them, though from a distance that must feel larger every year. Greenland has things to offer in return. Not grain fields, not forests, not silver mines, but walrus ivory, hides, rope. Arctic goods that, somewhere far away, are carved into luxury objects for people who will never know the names of the men who hunted them. The hunters bring the tusks back at great risk. They travel further north each year, into colder waters for fewer animals. But the world beyond Greenland has shifted. Elephant ivory has become more available in Europe. Tastes have changed. Roots have changed. The old demand weakens. For Eric, this is not abstract. It is the knife that still cuts, the nails that still hold, the difference between a proper repair and another season of pretending a broken thing is usable. He runs his thumb along the edge of his knife. It has been sharpened so many times that the blade is half what it was when his father gave it to him. He wonders if it will last another season. He wonders if there is any point asking the question. A boat is repaired with less confidence than it would have been a generation ago. Eric and his neighbor patch the hull with what they have. What they have is not what they need. They both know this. Neither says it. A young couple delays. They want to marry, they want a household, but starting a household requires goods that no longer arrive easily, so they wait, and then they wait longer. This is one of the quietest forms of abandonment. The outside world does not need to hate you, it simply stops needing what you have. Norse Greenland does not vanish because its people are foolish. It survives for centuries in a place that punishes every mistake. That is what makes the ending harder. They endured long enough to be forgotten. Eric and his people are not alone on the island. Beyond the farms, beyond the familiar paths, other people know this land differently. The Thule, they have their own technologies, their own routes, their own knowledge. They move through a world the Norse understand only partly. They know sea ice, they know animals. They know boats and clothing and hunting and seasons with an intimacy that comes from belonging to the environment rather than trying to remake it into something remembered from elsewhere. The Norse know they are there. They see the tracks. They hear the stories. Perhaps they trade sometimes. Perhaps they avoid one another. Perhaps there are moments of tension, misunderstanding, fear. The evidence does not let us turn every encounter into friendship or war. That uncertainty matters. Later storytellers want a simple answer. They want to say the Norse were killed, or rescued, or absorbed, or punished for failing to adapt. But the past rarely gives itself so cleanly. In the long winter evenings, the old men tell what they have seen. They warn the children. They embellish, the way old men do everywhere. The Thule become both real and exaggerated in the stories. From Eric's view, the people beyond the fjord are not a theory. They are tracks, a distant movement, a possible exchange, a possible danger. He may envy what they know, he may fear them, he may misunderstand them completely. What he cannot do is ignore the fact that others survive where his own world struggles. That realization does not arrive as a lesson. It arrives while mending clothing that is not warm enough, while watching ice conditions he cannot read as well as he wishes, while hearing of hunters who move through the coast with tools better suited to the place. The tragedy is not that survival was impossible in Greenland. Other people survived there. The tragedy is that this particular Norse world, with its farms, bishops, cattle, churches, trade routes, and memories of Europe, was becoming harder to maintain. Not because one thing broke, because too many things had to keep working at once. By evening, the farm looks almost peaceful. Smoke rises low from the roof. The seal has been brought in. Gudrid cuts food into portions with a precision that says more than worry ever could. Eric works the skin. He has done this since he was a boy. His hands know the work better than his mind does. While his hands move, he is thinking about other things. This is important to remember. The settlement is not a corpse. People here still laugh. They still argue over small things. They still notice who is lazy, who is generous, who takes too much. His father warms his hands at the fire. The old man complains about pain in his fingers. He has complained about it for years. The complaining is part of the household now. It is comforting in the way familiar things are comforting. A dying society does not feel like a dying society every minute. Much of the time, it feels like chores. The food is plain, but it is food. The room is smoky, but it is warm enough. The roof has problems, but it has not failed. The animals are thin, but not all lost. There are reasons to continue. That may be why no one leaves all at once. Some families do leave when ships allow. Some farms empty gradually. Some people move closer to surviving neighbors or cling to familiar ground longer than outsiders would consider rational. Home is not a strategy, it is a force. You do not abandon a graveyard easily. You do not walk away from walls your father repaired, fields your mother named, a church where your children were baptized. Even when a place becomes dangerous, it keeps part of you hostage. He steps out once more before sleep, partly to check the weather, partly because habit has already led him toward the shore. The fjord has darkened. Ice shifts in the distance. Clouds sit low over the water. For a moment he thinks he sees something. A vertical line, a mast maybe. He waits. The shape moves, breaks, becomes nothing. Only ice. Only water. Only the mind making promises the sea has not made. He turns back before full darkness. There is work tomorrow. There is always work tomorrow. We do not know how Eric's story ends. We do not know if he died on the farm, or left on a ship, or buried his wife, or watched his daughter leave on a vessel that would never return for him. That is not a failure of the story. It is the story. Most human lives do not end with a document. They pass through the world as work, hunger, warmth, fear, memory, then disappear into the silence between records. Norse Greenland did not leave us a final witness standing at the edge of the fjord, explaining what went wrong. It left ruins, bones, church walls, farmsteads, fragments of trade, the last written glimpses of people who did not know they would become evidence. No single cause can carry the whole weight. The climate grew harder. The farms became more strained. The sea became more important. Trade weakened. Ivory lost value. Ships came less often. The western settlement fell silent. The eastern settlement lasted longer, then slipped beyond the reach of writing. Maybe the last families waited for help. Maybe they adapted longer than anyone expected. Maybe they left in small numbers over time, carrying what they could and abandoning what they could not. Maybe some simply stayed until staying was no longer enough. What we know is quieter. A colony that had survived for centuries stopped appearing in the record. The church at Valsey lost its roof. The farms became ruins. The sea kept moving. And somewhere, on some ordinary morning no one wrote down, a person looked toward the horizon and saw nothing coming. No army had defeated him. No legend had claimed him. No historian stood nearby to give his fear a name. He was not a hero. He was not chosen by destiny. He was not the center of his age. He was a man at the edge of a cold sea, trying to keep his household alive in a world that had grown too distant to answer. And then slowly, even his waiting disappeared. No heroes. No destiny. Just survival, until survival was no longer enough. If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing to the Civilian Timeline. In this channel, history is not told through kings, generals, or legends, but told through the ordinary people who lived beneath their decisions. More lives like this waiting in the Civilian Timeline.